Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back for part 2 of this series on how to paint Gunpla. Again, a reminder, this series is going over how to paint Gunpla using spray cans, and that's what we're going to be tackling here in part 2 of this series. In part 1, we did all of our prep work here on the Entry-Grade Lah Gundam that we're going to be using here for this project. And just as a reminder, this is part 2 where we're doing the painting. Part 3 will cover all of the finishing work. That will be panel lining, decals, and top coat. And then after this series is done, then I will also be doing a separate series on how to paint Gunpla using an airbrush. So stay tuned for that in the near future. For now, like I said, we finished all of our prep work and modifications here on the Entry-Grade Lah Gundam, and we're ready to paint, right? Unfortunately, not quite yet, because through the process of doing all that sanding and work here on the kit, we've got a lot of oil from our hands and also the dust from the sanding and everything on here. So while it's not 100% necessary, it is a good idea to go ahead and clean the parts now before we go ahead and paint, just to make sure that we have good adhesion of the paint and everything on there. We don't want the oil and dust and everything getting in between the paint and the plastic that we've got here. So because remember, that was one of the reasons why we did want to do all the sanding that we did here on the kit, was just to not only get rid of any imperfections like nub marks, sinks in the plastic, and anything like that. We did also just want to give the plastic a little bit more of a coarse surface for the paint to better adhere to the plastic and make it less likely to scratch or chip off later on once we're handling the kit and once you're moving the kit around after it's all painted. So for this, you're just going to want to break the kit down into parts, throw them into a bowl or a dish or a tray or something so that you can soak everything in water. Use an old toothbrush to brush them, use some dish soap and warm water. Really, that's all you need to do. Just soak, scrub, rinse thoroughly, make sure you get all the soap off there too after you've done this, and also make sure to be careful not to lose any parts down the sink drain. Then you just need to spray all the parts out and give everything ample time to dry. You definitely don't want to start spraying if you still have water droplets still hiding in some of the holes or crevices anywhere in the kit, because that water will interfere with the paint. You can also get a dish drying rack that some people use for this step just to kind of speed it along. I don't have one. I usually just give it about 24 hours to dry. If I can, like sometime in between that time, I'll just like roll over some of the parts, just kind of turn them around just to make sure that they're getting dry on both the front and the back side and everything. But usually 24 hours is plenty enough to get all the water out of the parts. But all right, so now everything is clean and dry and we're ready to paint, right? Still not quite yet, because before we get to the paint, we have to put on primer on the kit, and more accurately, it's actually surfacer that we're going to be using here on the kit. And so surfacer, again, a step that's really important. While not 100% necessary, it's really important for 3 main reasons. The first one being, again, it helps to give you a good adhesion between the plastic and the paint. It basically sort of works as like a glue to, again, help the paint to better stick to the model kit. The second reason is that it gives you a good color base. You need to build your colors off of a kind of neutral base, and whatever color surfacer that you use will give you that base to work off of for the colors that you're going to be using to paint on it. And the third reason is that the surfacer allows you to see any imperfections that you might have missed before you go and add your painting. So in this process, if you do spray your surfacer and you see there's a nub mark or a sink or anywhere where you think you might want to finish cleaning up the surface a little bit more, you can go back and maybe sand that part a little bit more, spray your surfacer again, check it again, and then you can move on to painting. And so like I said, the color of the surfacer can be an important choice for you, and I think a lot of times you see people just kind of usually reflexively just go for a gray, as that's kind of the standard color for a surfacer, especially when it comes to Gunpla and plastic models. But there are other colors available, and other colors of surfacer can certainly be very useful for different reasons. There's black, white, pink, mahogany, and gray would be the main colors. So it's important to choose the right color, number one, just to cover up the color of the plastic, especially if you're going from like a red plastic part and you wanted to paint that into light blue, for example. Just painting the light blue right on top of that red plastic will give you a different look from if you put on some gray surfacer first to give you that gray base to build your color off of. So in order to choose the right color surfacer, you need to know what color are you ultimately going to be painting your parts. And so for this reason, you may end up using multiple different colors of surfacer on one kit, just because you're going to be painting different parts in different colors. And so for this step, I'll briefly explain about which color surfacers work well in different situations. But again, remember, there is no correct answer. There is no 100% correct way to use any particular color. It's just something to understand so that you can get the colors, the correct tone and the correct hue that you want to get for your project. Gray, like I said, is pretty much the standard. It's a very neutral color that you can build off of. It will make your light colors a little bit more dull, especially warm and bright colors like yellow, orange, reds as well. Anything light color will be toned down and dulled by the gray primer underneath. Pink primer is really great for warm and bright colors. So if you really want like bright yellows, bright reds, bright oranges, white surfacer is good for any bright colors that you want. So it could be bright warm colors like red, yellow, orange, like we talked about. Otherwise, bright greens, bright purples, bright blues. White surfacer is the best way to get the truest color of whatever paint that you're going to be using on top of that. And then we have black and brown or mahogany colored surfacers, which are really good for giving you a dark base for deep, heavy colors. These are best used for a more stylistic or dramatic painting style, again, to give you that really heavy tone. You can certainly build up light colors like yellow, white, any of these colors you can build up off of a black or mahogany color surfacer, but just understand it is going to be a little bit more of a challenge. It's going to give you a little bit different look. And so just to give you guys a couple of examples, say I wanted to paint the V-fin in a bright yellow, I would either use white or pink surfacer in that case. For some nice purple colors, I would either use white to get a really bright purple or maybe gray to get a just kind of a little bit more subdued medium purple color, or black, it would give you, a darker purple. And for my build that I'm doing here for this video, I'm doing a more kind of MSV, earthy tone kind of color scheme. So I'm just going to be using standard gray for this one, as that's just going to work best. I could use mahogany or black probably for this as well. But because I don't need any of the colors to be really bright, I certainly don't need any pink or white surfacer for this project. So this is the product that I'm going to be using for mine here, Mr. Surfacer 1000 in gray. It's pretty much the standard when it comes to just a spray can primer for plastic model kits. I would not really recommend using like automotive primer or any other kind of like spray paint primer unless it's specifically made for plastic model kits like Mr. Hobby or Tamiya. Another thing you may be wondering too is how many cans are you going to need? Is one can going to be enough for your model kit? For an HG kit, usually one can will be enough. If you're going up to something larger with a lot more parts, like a master grade or anything larger than that, even maybe some real grades, one can you may find will run out and it might not be enough to finish the entire kit. That's one of the biggest problems with spray cans, is that they do run out pretty quickly. Right, so let me quick go over some of the colors that I'm going to be using here for this kit. For the inner frame kind of joint parts, going to be using some gray here. This is Mr. Color Spray Dark Gray 1, number 31 in the line. For all of the parts of the kit that were originally white, going to be using light gray, number 97. And then for our two accent colors here, going to be using number 12, which is olive drab 1, and 39, which is dark yellow, a really kind of like a sandy MSV kind of color scheme here. And again, because the kit is pretty small, we don't have a lot of parts here. Each of these colors should last us plenty enough for our purposes. If you are painting a kit, like say for example, the unicorn, the MG unicorn, which has a lot of parts, and you wanted to paint all of the white parts in this light gray color, this one can probably would not be enough to finish the entirety of all of those parts. So just something to keep in mind. Again, these cans are kind of small. All right, so we got to figure it out what color surfacer we're going to use. Now we're finally ready to get that surfacer on the kit so we can start painting right. Still not quite yet. There is another thing to consider. We do also need to consider about masking. Now, if you're just going to be painting one color on every single part, this step doesn't really matter, but if there are parts that are going to require you to do any masking on them, that's something you need to think about ahead of time before you start painting, because it is going to make a difference as to which color you paint first, and then you need to mask that part or mask that section and then paint the secondary color. And it's much easier to paint certain colors over certain other colors than the other way around. So this is why it's important to think about this masking before you start painting, so that you can paint basically in the order of the colors that are going to make it easiest for you. So say for example, you have a part that's going to be dark blue, but you need one little like vent section to be in yellow, for example. If you paint all dark blue first, then mask your vent and try spraying yellow over that. You're spraying yellow over the top of dark blue. It's much more difficult than if you spray the yellow first, mask the vent, and then spray the dark blue. The dark blue is just going to cover really easily and not be affected by any yellow that you might have around there. It's just much easier to paint lighter colors first and then darker colors second. So now we are finally ready to paint. We just need the proper tools to do so. And what you need is actually pretty inexpensive. Aside from just the paint cans, we're just going to need a couple of things here, most of which you don't need to buy anything expensive for. All the tools to make it is pretty simple to get. You need a paint stand. In this case, I just have a cardboard box here. All you need to do is just take a cardboard box, cut it up into strips, line them up and tape them together, and you can have a painting stand like this this. Now I do have a video on this, I'll put a link to that down below, but it's very simple to just make a paint stand. Don't need to buy one. Other thing we're gonna need is also painting clips. Now this is also very easy to make. All you need to do is buy some alligator clips. Online you can usually buy alligator clips by the dozens or by the hundreds for very cheap, and you are going to need a fair amount. You know, if you're just starting out painting, you're thinking maybe you're only going to need like a dozen or a couple dozen or so. Trust me, it's never enough and you always end up needing more. So I have a lot here, as you can see. You need alligator clips and then just some bamboo skewers. Bamboo skewers are easy enough to get as well. You can usually find them at your local supermarket or like a dollar store or whatever kind of equivalent to dollar store you may have where you live. Alternatively, those can also be bought in bulk online for very cheap as well. And just a heads up, make sure that your bamboo skewers are the right size that fit into your alligator clips, because sometimes bamboo skewers are like thicker, and then once you buy them and then you go to attach the alligator clips onto the end of the bamboo skewers, you'll find out, oh, they don't actually fit because the skewers are too large gauge. So just make sure to keep that in mind. So we're ready to get our parts clipped and start painting. Go ahead and lay out all your parts and start clipping them on the alligator clips. Obviously you're going to want to clip on like the inside or the back areas where you're not going to need to get any paint. Usually that's on the inside of the part or anywhere where you're going to have connections that overlap. Because sometimes if there's nowhere to clip a part, you may need to get a little bit creative. You can either use tape or sticky putty or blue tack or whatever to just like tack or stick the clip onto the part, and you should be able to figure out a way to get it stuck on there for you to be able to paint it. And this is again another point where we can see why it was important to build the kit first to get a better understanding of where all the parts go and how all the parts overlap each other, because now you know which areas of the parts are actually going to be painted and which are not, so you can know where to clip the parts, and when you're painting you can know which areas of the part actually need paint and some areas might not, and some areas you may not have realized at first, but some areas are going to show on the part. And so it's a good thing that we built the kit first. We understand which parts are going to show ultimately and where the paint needs to go. All right, so once the parts are all clipped on there, and you make sure that they are securely on there, just because once you're spraying, the force of the spray can blow the parts off the clip if they're not securely attached on there. So just watch out for that. But let's go ahead and start painting. And remember that safety is important. Just because we're using lacquer paints and lacquer paints are toxic, it's not a good idea to inhale the fumes. Just a kind of simple way to remember this is that if you can smell it, then it's not good. So you shouldn't ideally want to be able to smell it. So a very good idea to wear a mask. Any kind of mask would work, but specifically like a painting respirator is the best option. Even if you're spraying outside, obviously if you're spraying inside, you want to make sure that you have a really good ventilation. Outside is the easiest way. Just again, make sure that you do also keep in mind that number one, it's bright enough outside. You don't want to do it at night when you can't see what you're doing. Also, you need to keep in mind the weather, like the humidity. If it's just rained or it's about to rain or it's just particularly humid, that humidity can affect the paint and the way that the paint is going to attach onto your kit. So you don't want to paint when it's particularly humid as well. Aside from a mask and ventilation, another thing to consider would also be wearing gloves, because we're using spray cans and the paint coming out of the spray can does spray rather wide. While you're holding onto your skewers and your clips of your parts, you are going to get paint on your hands, so it's a good idea to wear gloves as well. Again, you can just get some simple latex gloves just to keep from getting too much paint on your hands is a good idea. Finally, also keep in mind the area where you're painting too, just because the paint will create a lot of just fine paint dust that will get in and around everywhere else, so you don't want to do it in an area where you don't want to have all this kind of paint dust. So we're ready to start spraying, and it's a really important thing to remember whether you're using a spray can or an airbrush. As soon as you start spraying the paint, don't start it pointed directly at the part, because you may have little drops of paint or any kind of dust or water build up there on the tip of where the paint is coming out. And so that first initial blast might end up spraying, bad stuff onto your part. So start spraying away from the part and then move to spraying over the surface of the part. You're going to want to keep the part continually moving, either the part or the spray can continually moving. You're going to want to keep the spray can a good 8 to 10 inches away from the part. You don't want to have it either too far or too close. If you're spraying too far away, the paint is going to be drying too much in the air as it's traveling from the spray can to the part. It's going to give you a dusty and rough effect of the paint. It's not going to go on smoothly. Alternatively, if you're too close, it's going to build up too quickly and it's going to start to pool and drip and just make a mess of your parts. So you want to find a good distance. I'd say probably about 8 to 10 inches, probably about a good distance to keep away from the part there. A good method for coating the part evenly is just to do a thin kind of mist coat over the entire part. So again, removing the part around, getting a good mist coat first, and then go over it a second time immediately. Just follow that up with a more wet coat, quote unquote, just to where you're making sure that the paint is getting a good solid opacity over the entirety of the part. But again, you have to keep a really close eye on it, especially with spray cans, just because the paint can build up really quickly. You really don't want it to start to pool and, like I said, drip and just make a mess on the part. Now once each part is done, make sure that you're placing them back in the paint stand and that the parts aren't touching each other. You don't want to overcrowd your paint stand so that the parts are touching while they're in there, because then that's also going to mess up the paint. They should be free from each piece. So while the paint will be mostly dry to the touch within a few minutes, I wouldn't really recommend handling the parts for a good 20 to 30 minutes, especially when you're doing spray can painting, just because the way that spray cans apply the paint on there, it's going to be a bit more thick. With airbrush painting, you can handle the parts without too much issue after just a few minutes, but spray cans, I would give it at least a good 20 to 30 minutes before you're touching the parts to take them off the clips. And then at that point, they will be dry, but the paint is not actually fully cured yet. So I would also recommend then, if you can, if you're not in a big hurry to finish your project, leave the parts overnight. That's what I typically do. After the painting is all done, I'll leave them on the clips, I leave it overnight, and don't do anything else with the parts until the next day to make sure that the paint is given ample time to fully cure and harden onto the parts. So I finished painting on my surfacer and let the parts cure overnight. Now I'm just moving on to painting the colors one at a time, and it's a good time to talk about masking. So as you're going through painting your colors, again, if you are going to require some masking on some of the parts, a couple of good things to keep in mind. Although it's going to be more tedious and take more time, you're going to want to make sure you use small pieces of masking tape. Don't try just ripping off a huge cheap piece of masking tape and sticking that on there and hoping for the best. It's better to use small pieces around the area that you're specifically masking off, and then you can use the larger pieces to cover up just the large sections to make sure that your paint is not getting sprayed onto areas where it's not supposed to be. Another important tip too is before you're placing the masking tape directly onto the part, stick it onto either your shirt or the back of your hand or onto your desk or somewhere, just to take a little bit of that adhesive off the tape, just so that it's still going to be plenty sticky enough, but it's not going to be quite as sticky as if it's just like fresh right off the roll, just because it sometimes might be sticky enough, or there may be something that happened with your paint that once you go to peel that masking tape off, it's going to peel the paint up. It's happened to me, it's happened to everyone who's ever done any masking where you've had paint peel. It's going to happen to you, but you want to try to avoid that, and one way is just to stick the paint onto something else before you stick it onto the part to just get it a little bit less adhesive. And also super important to double and triple check the adhesion of the tape around the area that's masked off just right before you go to spray the paint, because you never know when the tape might start to peel up a little bit, or maybe it's kind of coming off, especially if it's in like a really tight area. The tape might be coming up a little bit, and so just make sure it's pressed down everywhere where it needs to be just right before you paint, just so that when you go and spray your paint, you're not going to be having any paint leaking underneath the tape or anywhere where it's not supposed to be. You also want to be sure to spray the color not too wet, because the more paint that you have on there, the more likely it's going to seep through the tape and get into areas where it's not supposed to be, and again, it's just going to make a mess of things. So spray carefully, keep an eye out on it, because the other reason too is if you're spraying too much and the paint layer is relatively thick, once you go and peel up the tape, you're going to have a little lip around where the paint is, basically a difference in thickness, and you'll see that edge around the paint where the masking tape was. So all right, finally we're done with painting, and as you can see, even before starting painting, there's just a lot of things to consider. And don't worry if it seems overwhelming, if it seems like, well, that's too much to think about just when it comes to just painting Gunpla. Trust me, it'll all make a lot of sense once you're actually doing it, and it will all become second nature to you once you start doing it. It's all very simple in practice. I just wanted to make sure to be very thorough in this video to explain everything for you guys, as there are a lot of important things to consider before painting, while painting, and of course after painting. So I hope that all the information allows you guys to have success in painting and hopefully avoid some of the issues, but you are ultimately going to run into issues. That is just going to be unavoidable. So it's important to keep in mind that mistakes are going to be made. Like I said, I've made mistakes. Everyone who's painted Gunpla has made mistakes, and you are guaranteed to make mistakes as well. It's going to happen eventually. So when mistakes are made, don't panic. Look at it as an opportunity to learn how to fix mistakes, because once you do it once, you'll hopefully not do it again, but then later on, as different things happen over your time, painting Gunpla or whatever, you know how to fix these mistakes. And just to help you guys troubleshoot a little bit, like I said, a couple of the most common mistakes probably going to be paint either pooling or dripping on the part when you're doing your painting, or paint leaking through your mask when you're doing your masking. If any of these things happen to you, really the best and the easiest way to go about it, while it may take more time and more effort, the best way would just be to sand those problem areas, sand the paint down, or you can remove the paint using some kind of paint remover or some kind of stripping product. Basically just remove that problem area and then just start again, paint it again. Like I said, I know it takes time, but it's going to give you the best results. So that's it for painting. That's it for part 2, guys. Like I said, in part 3, we'll be going over the finishing stages. That's going to be panel lining, decals, and top coat for our kit here. And then we'll be done. Then you guys will be pro. You'll know exactly how to go about painting Gunpla if you want to go the route of using spray cans. But like I said, then later in the next series, I'll be going over how to paint your Gunpla if you do want to try out airbrushing, which is what I would recommend. Spray cans are great for just kind of getting the hang of the basic steps of painting and everything that's required for painting. So I think it can be a great way to learn, but I wouldn't recommend sticking with spray cans for too long. If you can, it's a good idea to try out airbrushing. So we'll be talking about that soon enough. For now, guys, of course, if you have any other further questions about anything that we talked about in today's video, leave those down in the comment section and I can answer that for you as best as I can. If you guys want to check out some different models, paints, tools, and supplies, you can check the link in the video description as well to USA Gundam Store. Got all sorts of cool stuff there for you guys to check out. So thank you all so much for checking out the video here today. All of your support is greatly appreciated. Leaving a like, making sure that you're subscribed, or just leaving a comment and let me know what you thought of the video. Really appreciate it, guys. Till next time, have a great day. Bye.